Okay, good day once again to all students of this class. We're now in part 2 of contracts. Again, this is your coach, your instructor for the subject, Attorney Lyndon Maceren. Okay, the last time we have discussed part 1 up to stages of contracts. In this part, we will discuss the part 2, which are the essential requisites of contract, namely consent, object, cause, the form of contracts, and reformation of contracts. Last part we will discuss, or part 3 will be discussed in a separate video. So we begin our discussion with the essential requisites of contracts. So again, there are 3, namely consent of the contracting parties, the subject matter, which is the object of the contract, and consideration or cause. So the consideration is another term for cause. So consent is the first requisite. So without the 3, consent, without the 3 here, where's that one? Without these 3, consent, subject matter, and or object, and consideration or cause, there is no contract. Meaning, if one is missing, there is no contract to talk about, or the contract may be void or voidable, or unenforceable, or rescissible. So it could be a defective contract. So first requisite is consent. So consent is the meeting of minds between parties on the subject matter or the object and cause of contract or the consideration of the contract. Here, there must be concurrence of offer and acceptance. So consent is also a term that is when there is already an agreement between the two parties or the parties in a contract. So what are the requisites or requirements for consent? There are 6, namely plurality of subject, the legal capacity, the intelligence and free will, manifestation of intent of the parties, admission by the other party, and conformity of manifestation and cognition. The first requirement is that there must be plurality of subject. The subject we're talking about here are the parties in a contract. So there must be at least 2 contracting parties. So this is what it means. Because one party, if there is only one party, you cannot give consent because you're alone, or there can be no agreement or meeting of the minds. So there must be at least 2 parties. So in a contract of sale, there are 2 parties, the buyer and the seller. So they must agree. In a contract of donation, for example, there are 2 parties, the donor and the donee. Although there's only one obliged to perform, but the donee, who is the person who's going to accept the thing, is bound to manifest his acceptance in the document, in the deed of donation. Okay. The second requirement is that the person giving, or the persons giving the consent must have legal capacity. So this means that the contracting parties must be capacitated or capable, legally capable to give consent. So they are not disqualified by law. An example of this, who is disqualified by law, is when a person commits a crime, and the crime carries a penalty of imprisonment more than 6 years. So when that person is convicted of the crime he has committed, he does not only lose his liberty or freedom, he likewise loses his legal capacity to enter into contract. So a person in prison for more than 6 years cannot give or loses his legal capacity to enter into a contract. That's what you call person suffering from civil interdiction. So you will encounter that later. The third requisite of consent that is that the persons giving this consent must be intelligent, and there must be free will, meaning the giving of the consent must not be forced or coerced, or there must be it must be voluntary on the part of the consenting party. So voluntary na siya, no? Hindi pinugos. The fourth requisite is that the intent of the parties must be manifested. So if, like for example, if the buyer is going to buy a house, so he must manifest that and show it to the owner of the house that I like your house because it is in the hillside and I like properties in the hill. No? And also it is closer to my place of work. So at least it must be manifested. The intent must be manifested. And the other party must recognize or must be aware of the intent. Okay? So this is called cognition. Cognition is another word for aware, being aware or recognized the other party's intent. So the last one is that the manifestation and the cognition should conform to each other. Okay. Without these six, there is no consent. In some cases, there are contracts which are already prepared or was already been typewritten or already in a format, no? And the stipulations are already contained therein in the form. Example, if you buy a ticket or if you want to go to Mindanao and buy a ticket with TransAsia, the ticket already contains the provisions or terms or conditions of your of the carriage, the contract of carriage. In this case, this is a contract of addition, where you merely enter into the contract by simply agreeing to the provisions which are already stipulated in the contract. Now, question, is this contract of addition applicable here in our country? So there's a note here that answers the question. So the Philippines follow the theory of cognition and not the theory of manifestation, meaning that under the civil law, the offer and acceptance should concur. And this happens only when the offeror, who is the person who makes the offer, comes to know, and not when the offeree manifests his acceptance. So when the offeree merely manifests his acceptance, it does not mean that there is already consent, but it requires that the offerer must be able to know that the offeree accepts the offer. No? So those kind of contracts, like if you travel, a contract of carriage, it is arbitrary in our courts. It's not arbitrary. It's still subject to debate, you know, or debatable. Now, there's a slide here that shows you the flow of contract. So first stage of a contract is the preparation stage or the negotiation. And this is when it happens when the buyer makes an offer to the owner of the property. So that's the preparation and negotiation stage. When the owner does not agree to the offer, so he makes a counter offer. The owner of the property makes the counter offer that goes back to the buyer. So this is the preparation stage. Let's say, for example, the buyer says, I like your house. I'm going to buy it for 100 million pesos. No, 100,000 pesos. And the owner said, oh, that's too cheap. So he does not agree and then makes a counter offer. How about you double the price, 200,000 pesos? So that acceptance is qualified, no? So, and the owner is therefore making a counter offer. The counter offer is a qualified acceptance. So when the buyer agrees with the counter offer, he says, well, how much do you want? 200,000? Okay, I will buy. And the owner said, provided you pay in cash. So the buyer said, okay, I'll pay in cash. So he agrees with the counter offer. So it now gives birth or perfection to the contract. So this is the second stage. When there is agreement, there is meeting of the minds. So the buyer and the owner were able to meet their minds. In other scenario, when the buyer makes the offer, the owner immediately agrees to the offer. So it gives the perfection or birth of the contract. Diretso na, no? There is no counter offer to talk about. There's contract already. This is the second stage of the contract, perfection or birth. So the third stage is the consummation or performance or termination. So that is the delivery of their respective obligations. In case the owner of the property is obliged to deliver the title of the document, or the title of the property, and the document which is the deed of sale to the buyer. No? And for the buyer, he is obliged to deliver the payment to the seller or to the owner. So it involves delivery, and does would it result in the consummation in some cases, but not in sale, because sale of real property has still some warranties, implied warranties, such as authority of the seller or the warranty against eviction or warranties against hidden defects. So those kind of warranties. No? So until such time the warranties already are expires, so that's the time the contract is terminated. But if you say contract of loan, so upon delivery of the payment in a contract of loan, so that it already is termination. So the loan has been terminated. There's another contract of loan. So there are two parties in a contract of loan, the borrower and the lender. When the borrower already pays in full the total amount of the loan, so it will terminate the contract's life. Okay. So these are the three stages: preparation, perfection, consummation, performance, or termination.